we did a 70 session. We did a 70 session back 2 weeks ago, and it was absolutely incredible. Our alums from the 70s who participated, there were maybe 11 of them, shared their stories about being the first on campus. And it was so impressive. It was so impressive. And that one was recorded as well and is in the process of being edited and will be available for everyone to hear and watch. And strongly encourage folks to watch that because it was inspiring. It was inspiring. And as I was listening to the 70 session, I fully understood that I arrived on campus in the fall of '82 because of the efforts of people from the 70s who came on campus and immediately started advocating for more numbers. Immediately knew that there was an opportunity for more Latinos, Latinas, Latinx on campus to add value to campus. And so that's how Recuerdos started. It was like, we got to capture these stories. There's going to be 3 co-hosts. It'll be myself, Maria Pavon, and Javier de la Garza. And Javier and I were both in Alpha for many years. And I was having a discussion with Javier 5 or 6 years ago when we were talking this idea. And Javier is the one that came up with the name Recuerdos. And he was like, oh, it's a Recuerdo. And it was like, yeah, that's the perfect name for it. We'll call it Recuerdos. And so this idea has been around for 5 or 6 years. And it's flourishing this year. The 70 session was wonderful. The 80 session is going to be great. 37 people registered, and including many familiar faces, and including an admissions officer, Modesta Garcia, who was not a Princeton person, but was there 85 through 87, and she helped coordinate the first Latino graduation back in '86, which a few of us participated in. And so we're going to hear those types of stories today. It is going to be about the 80s. So what we're going to do is I'll share a little bit, and then Maria will share, and then Javier will share. And then we're going to go through and ask each person in the 80s to share a little bit about their experience. And it'll be, when you arrived at Princeton, where were you coming from? And tell us a little bit about your experience while you were there. And then tell us where you are today. And what was it like? We were the first in many different ways from our families and our communities, and we were always finding our own way there. And so back to the idea of Recuerdos is to be able to share stories with the incoming students about what we went through to hopefully make their experiences a little bit easier. So we're going to go through each of the different 80s individuals and have them share a little bit. And so as a reminder, please put your class year by your name so that Maria and Javier and I will be more able to identify who was from the 80s. And after we go through all the different folks in the 80s, we'll open it for questions and perspectives and broader questions from the audience or questions from the moderators about, tell me more about the Third World Center, or tell me more about Kenya, or your involvement in the summer program, or what have you. So that's going to be the way we're going to approach this. We'll go through the 80s. We'll ask each individual to speak maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and usually they go maybe a minute or two longer than that. Depending on how many folks we have in the 80s, we may only get through the introduction through the session, and that's fine. That's fine because we'll have a follow-up because we see this as a great forum where people can share their experiences and kind of learn from each other and find out maybe that we weren't on our own while we were there, that there were other people we could relate to, and that now 40 years later or 30 years later or 20 years later, we can think about it in a different way. And so this will be the first session for the 80s, but we do anticipate there will be more. With that, I'm going to just quickly recognize the Recuerdos team, and then I'm going to share my own. And after I share mine, Maria will share hers, Javier will share his, and then we'll start with the rotation around the 80s. One item, I personally will have to drop off in 20 minutes at the hour for a work meeting that I couldn't get out of. And at that point, Maria and and Javier will take over. And it's really going to be just making sure everyone has in the 80s gets to talk a little bit. And again, share their experience, where they're from, how they identify themselves, and what they're doing now. And then I'll probably come back around 30, 40 minutes later and be able just to listen, because from the experience I had in the 70s, there's just fascinating stories. And especially with this one, where I was on campus with many of you, and I just really, really would love to hear what you're up to nowadays. And the idea being that this starts the Recuerdo. It'd be great if afterwards folks could write them down and contribute them, and or volunteer for an oral history where Juana is helping coordinate those, so that we can make sure that we capture this. Now, I admit I'm 56 years old. I want to make sure that what I went through while I was there gets documented somehow, and maybe it'll help that 17-year-old coming on campus in 2022. 40 years after I walked onto campus, maybe the next person can learn a little bit. So the Recuerdos team, it's myself, it's Asenet, who is helping guide doing the technical. It's Margaret, who's on the phone driving through California. It's Juana, who is co-leading the effort, Juana Pacheco. It's Jeremy, who isn't able to attend today. And I think that's it. There's 5 of us who are meeting every couple of weeks to prod this along. And it's been hugely successful thus far, and we're hoping to keep the energy going. I'm going to go ahead and jump in with my recuerdo, and then again pass the baton over to Maria. So I mentioned Ricardo. Interestingly, or maybe not, but I registered at Princeton as Ricky. And I graduated from high school as Ricky, and my Princeton diploma says Ricky. I still get emails from Princeton for the class of '86 as Ricky, and it's who I am still, as a person. But I go by Ricardo now, living in LA. I spent 25 years in Cincinnati, and at that point I became Rick, because it was just too difficult to have Midwesterners say Ricardo. When I applied to Princeton, I was 16 years old. My parents were migrant workers. My dad never went to school. My mom went through the 3rd grade and then quit to become to be a migrant worker. They had 6 kids. I was number 6, and really benefited from having my older siblings teach me English, because Spanish was my first language. It was the language of the house. But luckily, my 5 older siblings speak in English. I was quickly able to pick it up, and I consider them my first teachers. Fortunately, my junior year, a LULAC counselor went to my high school to recruit kids to go to Andover Phillips Academy for a summer program. This LULAC counselor covered the Corpus Christi area, had never gone to my high school. That particular year, he decided to go to my high school, and I was selected. I was sponsored to go to Andover, and it opened up a whole new opportunity for me. I had never been beyond Houston, San Antonio, and Laredo as a 16-year-old, and then I got an opportunity to go to Boston. And when I got there and realized the world, realized that there was something north of Houston, north of San Antonio, or north of Laredo, I went back to Corpus Christi and I was depressed. I was like, I need to do something more than this, or I want to do more. I want to do more. I applied to Princeton. Corpus Christi had been very much a Yale feeder city, and so everyone from the good side of town that were Mexicanos went to Yale. And that same LULAC counselor, when I was telling him I was applying to Princeton, Yale, Brown, Rice, and A&M, he was asking me, why are you applying to those schools? You should only apply to one, because if you get in, someone else will not get in, and you're not going to go to 5. So you just go to the one that's your number 1 school, and it has to be, and it should be Yale, because all the Corpus Christi folks go to Yale. And I wanted to go to Princeton. I had read The Great Gatsby, and I had this vision of being at Princeton, drinking wine like what you guys are doing right now, and having grapes and cheese and bread, and that it was just going to be this romantic experience, and that it was going to be F. Scott Fitzgerald. It was going to be a great Gatsby. On the positive side, of course, it kicked my butt. At the end of the day, it kicked my butt. But one last story about applying. So the interview was with a white guy architect who worked in downtown Corpus Christi. And I remember taking the bus from Molina to downtown to interview with this guy. And I was 16 years old. I had never met a person who wore a suit to work every day who wasn't a principal. And I'm like going up to this architecture firm and asking for Mr. Whoever, I can't recall his name. And I'm sure he looked at me across the table and just laughed about what makes this little kid think he can make it at Princeton. And to some extent, he was right. To some extent, he was right, because it hadn't been done before. I had no idea what I was doing. I remember telling my parents that I was going to Princeton, and they're like, "Why?" And I said, "Because I want to go." And they're like, "Well, we can't afford it." And I said, we'll figure it out. And they're like, "Okay, we can't help you." And then my dad was telling the coworker, and the guy's like, "Oh, where is that? Is that in the Valley? Is Princeton in the Valley?" And it was just such a strange concept. So I got there, and it was more than what I expected. Socially, academically, surprisingly, like I took Algebra 101 and I got an A. So my high school didn't offer anything beyond trig. And in Calculus 101, I was getting an A. And it was like, I can do this. What I wasn't ready for was the social aspect of it, because it just wasn't, my high school was 100% minority. I had only had one experience north of Houston and San Antonio, and it was much more than what I expected. And those of you who were at Adelante, when I gave a talk one day, I said, I found my footing after Princeton, because Princeton kicked my butt. I didn't know how to navigate as a Mexicano, and as a Mexicano who everything was new to me. And just going across a different world, but we made it. And as I look at folks on here, I mean, I had such great support from Suzanne. Felipe was my roommate. Javier was a good friend. I remember getting off the bus at Nassau Hall with on Nassau Street with two suitcases, and David Garcia and Irma de Hoyos. We happened to have flown together to Newark, and we're catching the same bus from Newark to Princeton for the Summer Institute. And the three of us got dropped off at Nassau Square with our luggage, and we had to go to PIC to start the program. And it was the comfort of having friends like that were going through similar things, and having big brothers and sisters like Suzanne was there, and Veronica Gutierrez, who's Martin's sister, and Kim Olson, and Veronica, I forget, Carmona. There were such great people. And I got through Princeton because of help from friends, because I was a little puppy. And luckily, I'm not a little puppy anymore. I got my footing afterwards, and we're doing stuff like this. I've talked way too much, but that's my recuerdos. And I've written some of those stories down. I wrote a story about being at Nassau Square with my luggage. I wrote a story about, the first time I went to Winberry's where I didn't know what fettuccine was. I wrote stories about people underestimating my capability and happy for me to get a C because they thought I couldn't do any better. And those were the types of experiences. They're 2-page long stories, but they're things that I remember that I want kids of the class of 2026 to know about and not go through. So that's my recuerdo. I'm going to pass it on to Maria for her to share, and then Maria to Javier, and then we'll continue the rotation with the 80s. I spoke a little bit longer than the 3 to 5 minutes, but hopefully folks will be able to share a little bit about their experience, and then definitely want to hear from Modesta And I want to hear from, and Suzanne was class of 81. So Suzanne will talk, will have an opportunity, but Modesta will be able to share her experience as an administrator there. And I see Maxine. This is great. I'm going to pause now. I am going to drop off in 10 minutes, but I'll be back later. I'm going to hand the floor over to Maria.
Hola, ¿me pueden escuchar? Can you hear me all? Okay. It's so great to see everyone, Ricardo. Thanks for passing it over my way. And thank you for those of you who voted that I'm an Alpha. I love being an Alpha. I bring you greetings, felicitaciones from New Orleans, Louisiana. It's hot, hot, hot here. So I'm sure it's hot elsewhere. And well, what can I tell you? My recuerdo is I came from Puerto Rico. So when I got on that plane, I was crying because I had never really left Puerto Rico. And I didn't know what to expect over in Princeton. And I had never really lived in the U.S. as an adult. And I also left behind a boyfriend who I since reconnected. And he's now my second husband. So high school husband. But there was another husband in the middle. Anyway, I always say that I grew up at Princeton because I knew how to be a Puerto Rican woman in Puerto Rico. But when I got to Princeton, I had to learn about living in the cold and wearing long sleeve anything and touching the snow and then realizing as you come inside it melts and hearing the rustle of the bushes and thinking like I would see in Puerto Rico would be iguanas, but these were squirrels. So all that was super culture shocking for me. And I remember ending up at the counseling center with Dr. Roberts and Makash to just help me figure out how I could be a Puerto Rican in the United States because I never lived here before. And so there were all kinds of good people who were super supportive. I remember Paula Chow at the International Center, remember Cadio Dios Quiñones. And of course, 2 years later, my sister Frances joined and her buddy Alicia Melendez, who's on this Zoom, all super cool. We had such a great time. There were times there early on that I felt like being a Puerto Rican was not a good thing. I remember what I called a drunk preppy on Prospect Street. He knew I was Puerto Rican. He said, "Oh, Puerto Rican rum is piss water." And I just looked at him like, "You don't know. Ours is the best rum." Anyway, also a professor who told me, I took a philosophy class because I was a religion major. He said, "You're philosophically blind." And I was thinking, you're blind in many other ways. So, I mean, just those put downs, now we know they're called microaggressions. What was great fun was being part of Acción Puertorriqueña y Amigos. And I remember very distinctly that we would have what are called parrandas. They're similar to posadas. And we would go around singing, at night into the different rooms, bringing alcohol and trying to dance before Christmas. And the proctors chasing after us. We would roll carpets and dance. And I'm sure some of you who were around will remember and share that. So that was fun. I did visit with the TWC, the Thurlow Center. And that's where I did get a chance to meet Michelle Robinson at the time. She had a sibling who was the older basketball player, David. And of course, she's been our first lady. And I did volunteer. It was fun. So also, I was very lucky because there was a woman in class of 84, there she is, Gretchen Sierra, and Gretchen was in my high school. So I had someone to guide me in figuring out how to be myself there. And my best memories, if I have to think, one was that, and maybe it was you, Modesta, I don't know, someone sent me and Leonor Fernandez, she's now a doctor in Harvard and she's Argentinian, to go recruiting for Latinx students in some high school there in New York City. And I, of course, had not ever done any of that, taken the train, any of that. And then Leonor taught me how to drink mate, that wonderful tea that is so good. And it was just an amazing experience. And just the opportunity to then, and this is where I'm going to do the share screen. I was the first one in my family, but then after that, I don't know if, can you see the screen now? You see him? Yeah, that's my brother, Jose Luis. So he was class of 97, but he took a little detour and only graduated 2019. And so he's now there living at Princeton. So if you ever need a Puerto Rican contact, he's there. He's getting a PhD in mathematics at NJIT and living in there. And then I want to share another picture because you saw Jose Luis there as a grown man, but let me show you pictures of him when he was a bambino. At my Princeton graduation, with my father. May he rest in peace. Let me open this. And then I have another sister, the one I told you, class of 87. And you can see her here. Let me share the screen again. So this is sort of the show and tell portion. Okay, so that one waving his little hand there, that's my brother, Jose Luis, who just saw graduate. Me with my little armband, and we were protesting apartheid. Oh, and I almost got arrested for doing performing artists for nuclear disarmament. And I knew my dad was going to kick my butt, so I ran, so I didn't get arrested. And behind there, you see that's Francis, class of 87, my sister. That's my dad, who passed away not long after that picture was taken. So Princeton has a thing in my family. And the last one picture I want to show you is just a bit more modern. And it's when Jose Luis graduated. We have another sister who's not a Princeton gal, but she was always there for you. She's my middle sister, Angie. And Angie has hung out, and I know Maru Luzano, and other people know Maru, who's there. Hello, Maru. So I wanted you to see how Angie, Jose Luis, and I were at his class night. Oh my goodness. And of course, there are all these young ones, and then us middle-aged folk at the class night under a Blair arch. I don't know, 2 years ago. You see me on the left, Jose Luis in the middle, and Angie, honorary Princetonian sister of mine, as she went to Franklin and Marshall. So y'all, that's my story. I look forward. Oh, where I am now, New Orleans, Louisiana. I became a law professor and then a dean. I was a dean of the law school at Loyola. And then I stepped down and became a professor. So I'm professing, teach immigration law, family, lots of things. And also this fall, I started a PhD program at the University of New Orleans because I got PhD MV from my brother. And so I'm the first cohort of a social justice studies cohort at the University of New Orleans. And I basically, I want to like bring on a revolution. So I'll say goodbye to patriarchy and let's go. So that's my story. Pass it over to our next speaker.
Hi, everybody. Yes, so thank you, both you guys. It was amazing. Really lost myself in your presentation. And thanks, Ricardo and team. You know, the Recuerdos thing is just a fantastic idea. I'm thrilled that you have any part in the origins of this, but I think it's just a really important element. And, I think from my perspective, whatever we can offer, I'm still involved. I've actually gotten more involved with Princeton in these last, 10 years, and then doing alumni work. And now I'm helping with career services. I was the president of ALPA and so forth, which is, if you had told me that when I was a student, I would say, that's just not going to happen. Basically I have this one memory of Michael Lopez at some point saying, you're not really Chicano. And I'm like, kind of what's Chicano? I was from Texas. So, we didn't have that perspective of any kind of really pride in being Mexican. We would go to Mexico. My mother's from Mexico, and we'd speak with our cousins. So we spoke Spanish, I think, reasonably well. But it was really, there was all kinds of variations on what I was learning about myself as much as, what Princeton was. I came from San Antonio following my brother Felipe, who will hopefully speak in a minute. And, not so different from Ricardo, Princeton kind of kicked my butt in terms of the social aspects and really kind of finding your place. And it took me a while to realize, eating clubs were really not for me, and that was going to be okay. And, I just needed to find my way. I think some of my best memories were being in the food co-op at the Third World Center. I was a menu manager. So Friday night I would, go over there and look through a book and type up this menu on the, pre-PC thing and, write down all the ingredients for the shopping group that would go buy it, at whatever the grocery store was. And then we try and, work through these meals over the course of the next week. And, a few strong memories. Michelle Robinson was, in that group. So we got to share a few meals. And, they would try like, why did you have us make this, exotic chicken dish? Like we have exactly an hour to cook and, a chicken for 30 people or whatever. So, anyway, there was just a lot of fun, and I found a lot of comfort really in the Third World Center, and, miss it. And I frankly am, a little upset that it was really not done very graciously in terms of, tearing it down. They did, of course, put a great building, much more architecturally significant. I'm an architect. But, I think there was I feel there's a lot there. There's a lot of memory. It was really not honored in the way it should have been. So I still take issue with a lot of things from Princeton, that, it's a different era. I really appreciate how far it's come. I think there's a lot of work to do. So a couple of, little snippets, not full recuerdos, but these are just memories that really stand out to me. One was, I started to feel like, there's the folks on financial aid and the folks that are not on financial aid. And that to me was kind of a stronger distinction than, so much being, one side of Latino or more Princeton or more Chicano or more Mexican or more whatever. I learned about myself. I had not really had any strong experiences with, African Americans or blacks or whatever we, used to call them in the 80s. And the Third World Center, I made some very good friends there and really felt a sense of community with them. And I don't think I would have ever gotten that if I stayed in San Antonio. There was a real sense of camaraderie, and I loved that. And the other thing is, working at food services. We go to the graduate school. There was a whole group of us, Rolando Ramirez and a few others. And, we would sort of clean the dishes. And I was very proud of my skill at, sorting forks and knives and dirty drinks. And then afterwards, I had this distinct, wonderful memory of sledding on these giant food service trays down, the hill there, and, almost killing ourselves, hitting trees and going into the water and sort of. So, and I can't recall everybody that was there, but these are things that never would have happened had I, stayed in San Antonio. So a lot of really positive things, and they were kind of in between spaces. They were sort of not, so you march in the P raid, and I feel like, all these other people had perhaps a more, we'll call it typical Princeton experience, and mine was, and probably a lot of people on this call just had a very different one. They might have found a lot of joy in things that were not, listed, let's say, in the catalog as things. This is how you're supposed to socialize. This is how you have fun. These are house parties. These are, that's not where I found my joy at Princeton. A lot of time in the architecture studio, and I'm kind of stuck with the architecture business. I'm now, have my own firm here in Westchester, and just north of New York City. Have a few employees, which again is kind of a dream come true, and really enjoying that. So the stuff I'm doing at Princeton, after ALPA, which by the way, also, I was kind of in and out of the Chicano caucus and that kind of thing, and not sure that I totally connected with the organization of it. But ALPA, I just really have appreciated. It's really been a source of growth for me. And it's led to, these meetings on campus. I remember thinking Prospect House was where, the fancy alumni go. And I actually gone and had these dinners there as the president of ALPA. And it's like suddenly you find yourself in the place that used to be, for those people. And it's really kind of a revelation. And I've met all kinds of really, great alumni, and they're doing good work. And I think career opportunities is something where I feel like we really have a opportunity, as alumni to share with the younger generation. I mean, my son went there, so he was class of 2018, and we'd walk around campus, and just the conversations you hear on Parents Weekend or whatever is, one family, they're saying, I'm going to connect you to my friend, the senator, or this and that. I mean, you just feel the opportunities available to some students, and other people, that they're just not there, as they weren't for many of us. So I think whatever we can do to be that alumni, the revered alumni body, I think is a great thing. So I'm very committed to that. So I'm going to end there. Hopefully that was of interest, and I'm going to pass it over to Alicia. Good to see you.
It's been really nice to hear your recuerdos, guys. They're quite similar in some ways. I also came from Puerto Rico, and at Princeton it was hard. I was used to being, as many of you probably, I was used to being really top of my class. Everything was pretty easy until I got there, and I'm a scientist. I'm still a scientist. I'm a biologist right now. And I tell my students, I took genetics and I now teach it. And when I took it, I suffered through it. And I tell my students all the time, it's something you have to work at it, right? I mean, it was hard. It was really hard. But I think that I was also an independent. So I also felt that the social the social environment was difficult. I didn't want to join a club. I didn't want a club to define me. And that was really my issue, that I didn't want to. I was very social. I went to all the clubs. In fact, it was kind of funny. Years later, I was getting bills from some of these clubs. They thought I was a member, but I never joined a club. So it's not that I didn't like going and socializing. I just didn't like to be part of one single club. I just didn't think that any one of those clubs defined who I was. I also felt that, growing up in Puerto Rico, growing up in a majority of Puerto Ricans, it was a very different environment when you come to the mainland and you feel that you're now all of a sudden a minority. And that's not something I was used to. And so that was something that took some understanding. Like I remember going on, I was at Maddie and going to the dining room, and all of a sudden there were a group of people who thought that I should belong with them because, I was whatever. It just didn't seem, all of a sudden I had like a stamp on my face that meant that I was different, and I wasn't used to that. And for whatever, if it was going into a group it just didn't, it felt like I was always the other. That's kind of how I always felt my freshman year. I had people like Maria and people who were ahead of me. Another funny story is when I signed up to come to Princeton, I wasn't the first from my high school, but I was the first woman from my high school. There was another from my high school, another kid, Esteban Fuertes, who was in the same class as Maria. And so I remember I signed up and I sent all the paperwork, and I said, Esteban, I sent all the paperwork and I signed up for kosher because I thought kosher meant it was better. And he's like, Alicia, but you're not Jewish. I said, what do you mean? Kosher is not the better food? So I had to call the admissions office and tell them, I changed my mind. I don't want kosher food because it was so new to me. All of it was really new to me. And my family thinks that it was a religious experience. I'm very grateful to my experience at Princeton. It was the first time I was in a lab doing science. And to me, I mean, since then I've gotten my PhD at Columbia and I've done postdocs and I'm a full professor now and I'm still doing science, but I cherish my time in the lab as a junior and as a senior doing my thesis. I run into my advisor every now and then at meetings, and he still tells me that some of my work is still around, like some of my movies are still around. And I feel that it's a place where I was taken really, as a student, I was taken very seriously. And I make an effort to take my students, undergrads, who, for the most part, don't accomplish a lot, as opposed to graduate students who have more time and can devote more effort. But I take them very seriously because I feel that that's how I was taken into account when I was an undergrad doing research. And so that has stayed with me. I'm very, very grateful for my time there. I can pass it on. Who should I pass it on to? You guys tell me.
Why don't we do David Portillo?
Okay, thank you.
David, are you there?
Yes, gracias.
Okay.
Well, I already shared that I was in food service and an independent, and would always pop in and say, "Hey, does anybody need a sub in the work crew? No, but do you want to eat? Sure." So that's mostly how I ate. So I really wish the Thorold Center's piece was there. I remember getting to Princeton. Renee Chacon was a student who had been at my high school in Los Angeles. So my Chicano Jesuit counselor suggested I talk to him because just like Ricky was talking about, everybody going to one school. I was in a prep school that everybody went to Stanford. So the whole goal was not to go to Stanford, but get in. So I had to look for another school. And of course, having a Mexican dad was also good to not be really close, so that I would, be visited every weekend. So it was really great to be there. It took a while for me to realize that I was never going to see a tortilla there. And that was pretty shocking, day after day of just bread. And at some point, I remember we made a deal with Severiano from Watsonville to see if he would make us tortillas during one thing. But that sort of cost a lot. So another time, we actually had tortillas shipped in a can, an round can, like a tuna can from San Antonio. But they were so wet that we tried to dry them on the stoves. It just didn't work. So it was very much a big culture shock socially to be there. But academically, after messing up my first quarter or semester, my parents, it's like, tengo que llamarte para que hagas su tarea. I decided I would just, ace it, just so they wouldn't bother me. And so that was, I think, interesting to see that and actually an African-American sophomore student recommended I get out of my, dad's promise that I become an engineer. And I think it was really, Hosa had called me from the admissions office, said you don't have to go into engineering. You could get into Princeton. So, of course, I wound up doing creative writing. And now I became a teacher, a community organizer, and now work at the Denver Foundation as a philanthropist, or, making grants to organizing groups. The big shock, I think, when I went to my first Chicano caucus meeting was to see that it was run by women, all women. So I thought, oh, it's always been this way. And Mirna Santiago immediately told me, it's like, no, it has not always been this way, but, we fixed it. So there's no machismo going on. And so now it is this way. So it was a great experience in terms of being in a women-led organization for me. I know that Javier, once he saw our Chicano Caucus logo on a t-shirt, came out looking like a Star Wars one, couldn't come back, but I still would coax him to try to see him again. The big experience that changed me for a long time was when David Avalos was brought over from Rutgers as an independent studies program that many of us went to, Growing Your Own Chicanohood. And that was really the first time I looked at my Mexican family, what I loved and hated, the American culture I was in, what I loved and hated. And he suggested we create a third way. And I'm still working on creating that third way. Another big shock, I think, was at the Pachanga. I found out that, a lot of the I don't know, Suzanne, if this is true, but a lot of the Texas Chicanos were fearful. Their parents had told them that the California Chicanos were going to corrupt them and make them smoke pot. So I know that was like a big fear there. I don't know if that was everybody's fear all the time, but I did meet someone I worked with years later from the Texas farm workers. I didn't realize that everybody was going to sleep in the next morning when we had our speakers. So me and maybe two other people were there when the Texas farm workers were presenting at 9 a.m. the day after the big night, at Penn. And that's actually who, that staff actually trained me as an organizer 30 years later. It was just sort of interesting how that went full circle. Also, I was really wonderful with Acción Puertorriqueña to be introduced to habichuelas and everything else, but also to salsa. I came from, disco, funk, and punk in LA. So it was, I really didn't know how to dance at all. And I still don't, but I really did take lessons quite a few times with other males, which I guess wasn't best way to learn how to do it. I think it's been, the admissions office sent me back a few times to go recruit students. And after a while, we realized we just were trying to get kids to think about going to college, just in general. And I really look back at that experience as, because I'd been in a prep school in LA after being in an all Mexican parochial school. I was in an all white prep school. I'm like, okay, I've done all white before. So that wasn't the big shock. But I think the big shock was just socially how difficult it was, I think, before the college system started, to have our communities or to create community. And so after undergrad, I did go to Brown to, continue doing creative writing for a bit, but mostly just became a full-time activist as well. So, but I also wanted to thank Suzanne for all our meals together, both as she was undergrad and as a graduate. She came into the admissions office, so it was a great friend there. Felipe and I traveled across the country after I went to go visit him in San Antonio. But first we had an INS rate of our bus, and all, there were only a few Chicanos left. All the Mexicans and immigrants were taken away. So I wrote a story about that to my parents, which I haven't told Ricky, but I'll try to share in our Recuerdos thing. Because after that, Felipe somehow found a place that delivered people from the Air Force that were getting shipped to Germany, I think, Felipe, needed their cars shipped to Germany. So we had to get a car to New York. So, of course, because it was the 280ZX, we had to see if it could go over 100 miles an hour. I'm not sure it did, but, we did make some things happen there. Eventually, things started coming out of the engine, so we stopped that. I'm very grateful right now also to be in Alpa. I think in the summers, I really didn't know what to do. I would go back and work my summer jobs every summer. And I really hope that Chicanos and the Latino community at Princeton, have us as contacts, as alumni for referrals in the summer of what to do with your summers. I'd love to listen to more stories. So I'm going to stop here before we talk about any more caucus activities. Though I did love the snow football game after we made chicken enchiladas at the Thirlwell Center for the Chicanos visiting us my junior year. I'll move it on to Suzanne Villalon.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Wow, I don't really know what to talk about. There's so many experiences that we all shared at Princeton. We were all going through the same thing. I think the common experience we had was how difficult it was, but at the same time, how much we recognized that we shouldn't be the only ones there. And I think that's what led me to working as a student recruiter. Also, that was a great way of getting home, because they paid for us to do that. None of us could otherwise have gone home, around for break. But also as an admission officer, I just knew that despite how hard it was at Princeton, there were so many other people that should have, from South Texas who needed to have the opportunity to go to Princeton. But it was like landing on Mars. When I got off the airplane at Newark, I remember taking a taxi to campus. And after about 10, 15 minutes, I told the taxi driver, wow, Newark is so big. I mean, we haven't gotten out of the city. And he kind of laughed at me and he said, oh, we've already gone through a lot of towns. So, everything was different because in South Texas, you have a small town and then farms, and a small town and then farms. So that was, I recognized right away there were a lot of things I didn't know and a lot of things I was going to learn. And sometimes it was hard for that to be so exposed that way. Like in the chat, I mentioned the way people dressed. I mean, I didn't understand that. Coming from South Texas, I thought jeans were hot. And I thought I was prepared for the weather. And obviously I was not. And I mentioned one of my roommates. She kind of really talked me into wearing her coat because I was like, oh, that's okay. That's okay. I don't need to wear it, because really I didn't think it was very attractive. But so I walked to the graduate school to work in the cafeteria there. And when I came back, I was like, okay, where do I get one of these things? I understood why they were so warm. So, there were so many experiences like that my freshman year. And so when I became a sophomore, right away, I sought people out that I knew were going to have the same experiences. As a student recruiter, I met Sophie Cano, Cano Caladonato now from Harlingen High School, and encouraged her to apply. And she went to Princeton. I also met Kim Wyatt and did the same. And just kept it going. Sylvia Hurtado was an admission officer. She graduated. She's from San Antonio. She became an admission officer, so she stayed on. And it was really nice to have her on campus. And she was like a role model. And when it was my senior year, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to get a PhD in sociology, but my parents didn't understand what I was going to do with that. And so I ended up in law school, but I wasn't ready for law school. So it was really helpful to have Sylvia in the admissions office. And I already knew a lot of the people in the admission office, having worked there, and was hired to work there. And so many of you are familiar to me as people who were there when I was an admission officer. And being at Princeton as an admission officer was a very different experience from being there as a student. But I still kind of hung out with everybody, as well as other Chicano admission officers in the other Ivy League schools. Those people are still some of my best friends, just as the students are that I went to Princeton with. Probably, I'm a lawyer, and probably the thing that I've done the most in my legal career is representing Social Security disability claimants or disabled individuals who are trying to get Social Security disability benefits. I did that for many, many years. And back in 2012, I started working for this agency. I'm currently in management. And although I live in San Antonio, I'm managing in one of the Houston offices. And probably will do that until I retire, or we'll see. We have a new leadership, so things will be changing, and we'll see what happens next. I don't want to talk too much. I mean, there are so many experiences that people should share about their journey at Princeton, but
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know who to hand it off
So
to.
should we pass it to Olga? Olga Lara?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to see so many of you again. My name is Olga Lara. I'm Princeton class of 81. I certainly appreciate and am also a product of so many of the experiences that many of you had being first generation at Princeton. For me, my highlights at Princeton were the end of my fall semester as a freshman. I had what I call an emotional breakdown. The people at the medical center said that it was exhaustion. And when I went home during the winter break, I never thought that I would return. And all my father told me was that, Mija, you've done more than anyone else. He said, if this is all that God is allowing you to do, he said, we're grateful. And that was what gave me the courage to return for spring semester. So I plowed through spring semester and completed it. And I really credit actually two people for getting me through my sophomore year. I was living in Nunu Quad in 1942 Hall. Assistant Dean of Student Affairs, Frank Ayala, lived in the apartment in 1942. He would have regular Chicano caucus events in his apartment. And Manuel del Valle was a visiting professor that year, and I took his class. And we would have regular gatherings in Frank Ayala's apartment for the Chicano caucus, and Manuel del Valle would be there, and we would make tortillas and have comida mexicana, comida puertorriqueña. And that's what got me through my sophomore year. And it was a little bit each year that was able to get me through. Because as so many of us know, there weren't very many of us there. And it was so very difficult to be able to struggle through that. So I am truly, truly blessed for the people who were there to be able to help me through that emotional breakdown and to be able to be my support system. And I don't think that is an unusual case. I think there are many of us who are right there truly on the edge, on the precipice of being able to fall over. And there were so many other people who were the ones who were able to pull us back from that precipice and be able to lift us up. So I'm so extremely grateful for that. I'm also grateful to Princeton because I, like many of you, worked in the Department of Food Services, and I learned to work reunions, which is like the number one event at Princeton in terms of food services. And because of that, I learned the skills to be able to manage large events. So the past 20 years, what I've been doing is major events for professional sporting events. So I was in Denver doing the Major League Baseball All-Star event, doing hospitality, these large parties for corporate groups. I'm getting ready to go to Los Angeles to help do that for the Super Bowl in February. So Princeton gave me all of these skills that were learned outside of the classroom. And I'm very, very grateful to Princeton for giving me those many opportunities, because I, as many of you, the very first time I was ever on an airplane or on a jet was when I left to go to fly to Philadelphia, in my case, to get to Princeton. And so through all of those opportunities, I'm so very grateful for them that I now have been elected the president of the Princeton Alumni Association of Houston. And we are incorporating many activities and coordinating many activities through the affinity groups, both the Black Princeton Alumni Association, ALPA, the GLAD organization, the Women's Organization, and making those a part of our regular Princeton regional alumni event system. And like I think Javier was talking, I never thought that I would be the person so like, rah-rah Princeton. But I'm also was recently elected the class of 81 secretary. So I'm now an officer for my class. But the only reason that I do that is hopefully to be able to broaden the tent and make sure that all of us who have had this opportunity, no matter how traumatic it may have been, to be able to count my blessings for what Princeton has given me and be able to provide those same blessings for future generations. So I'm just delighted to be a part of this. And I saw that Manuel del Valle was on our list. And so every time I see Manuel, I try to give him thanks, because I stand on his shoulders and on the shoulders of all the people who came before me. So thank you very much for giving me this chance to share my stories.
Olga, thank you. That was so moving. Now we have Amparo, who wanted to speak about Millie, class of 89.
Hello, everyone. I really thought that it was important to share a memory of Milagros Mejia, who was so very important to those of us who graduated in the 90s and in the 80s. The first time I met Milagros, she was wearing a beret and she was running the Chicano caucus meeting. And she got Raúl Ramos to say, bueno, pues, ya todos cállense. And Millie started the meeting by saying, oiganme cabrones, ya, por favor. And I thought, who is this woman, right? Starting a meeting, yelling at all these men, right? And I was just like, wow, in awe of her. Later on, Millie took me to buy my first coat because she knew I was from LA. She saw that I was so homesick that she took me home to New York City. And the moment I got on the train and I saw the graffiti, I was glad, right? I was happy, right? I was this East LA kid. I was like, yes, graffiti. And her mom fed me. And I remember a very funny story. We were about to get in the taxi cab from the train station to get her a house. And she told me, montate. And I said, no, montate tú. Yo no me la voy a montar. I don't know who he is, right? And she looked at me, she said, what do you think I just told you? I said, you told me to mount him. I'm not mounting him. What? No. Is this another Puerto Rican thing? This is how you pay for the cab? And she said, no, muchacha, get in the cab. That's what I meant. You know? And Emily, there's these beautiful pictures that we need to find of Milagros dancing with the Ballet Folklorico, singing with Acción, helping us run, doing joint Acción Chicano Caucus meetings because she felt at home with the Chicano Caucus and really sort of mentoring a whole group of us, right? Not only while we were there, but after graduation, taking on some of the younger folks and talking to them and making sure that we preserve that wonderful report that was written by people like Frankie and Saul and Martin about the status of Latinos at Princeton, that helped us to move that forward to really sort of make demands for better student services, for better admissions. And after, right before Millie graduated, we had the largest group of Latinx students at Princeton. I think just from California, we had some remarkable number, like 28 of them, right? Which is unheard of. And there was something like 130 Latinos on campus at one point. And so Millie is really important because she was really that person that was that bridge between people like Susana and Martin and Felipe, and then passed on that torch to those in the 90s. So I really wanted to honor her memory. Thank you, everyone.
Amparo, thanks. So who are we going to next?
Can I speak? It's Cora.
Hola, Cora.
Hola a todos. I'm Cora Monroe, or Cora Monroe Gonzalez, if I proceed in Hispanic nomenclature. I'm class of 80, and I'm going to beg you to forgive me, but no estoy presentable esta noche. A lot of things are going through my mind. The people, it's great to see this gathering of 80s graduates. I just realized that as a class of 1980, I'm a caballo between the later 70s and the early 80s. I came to campus from at a point of transition. My father was in the Air Force. He was retiring from active military duty. We were at Plattsburgh Air Force Base in upstate New York. And so I first visited Princeton with my mamita. We rode down on Amtrak all the way from the North Country. And then I guess we caught a bus at the big bus depot in New York City. I should be able to remember the name, but I'm sure you'll forgive me. And it was a beautiful campus.
Port Authority?
Port Authority. It so happened that Mamita y yo were received. We stayed, of course, with a student, and it happened to be someone whose parents or whose father was from my hometown of Aguadilla, where I live right now. And that was my mother had grown up with the students' father's sisters, and that was purely random. The world is small. The father left Aguadilla to study at the University of Puerto Rico and was a brilliant man and a professor at the University of Puerto Rico. I majored in French, minoring in Spanish. I'm currently a professor of French and Humanities at the ahora siempre, I can't remember the nomenclature, but at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez campus. Antes, ahora y siempre colegio. I teach, as I said, French. I was coming to Princeton from a place where I wasn't from and to which I knew I would not return. I have an American father and a mother who was a native of Aguadilla. I was born in Aguadilla. If all goes well, I will be buried in the family plot in Aguadilla. And in between that beginning and that end, well, Air Force bases, back and forth from Air Force bases to Aguadilla. Princeton to me was a challenging place. As someone said my sophomore year, we can do the work, but there's so much of it. It was a magical place for me. I'll never forget in freshman year going to a talk by Edward Heath, somebody whom I had just read about in Newsweek and not Newsweek, and U.S. News and World Report and the papers and on television. And here's this ex-prime minister of Great Britain. I get to ask him a question, and in the courtyard of Makosh, he gave me all this time. I couldn't believe that Edward Heath was answering my little old me question. How can I say? I went to Princeton to work hard. It was challenging. It was not easy, but I left with what I needed. And the more I look back at the past, the more surprised I am, because although I was a good student, I was coming with my little old, from upstate New York, my Regents diploma with honors, scientific Regents diploma with honors, and I didn't really know what the wider world was like outside of Aguadilla and Air Force bases. Lots of memories. Frank Ayala, Franklin Moore, taking the seminars offered by Arcadio, my dear Professor Diaz Quiñones, who brought the University of Puerto Rico to us. He brought Gervasio Garcia, one of the most prominent professors in history and sociology, the Argentine critic Marta Traba, who was teaching in the late 70s at the University of Puerto Rico. He brought this community of intellectuals, and he was a visiting professor from UPR Rio Piedras. He eventually was captured by Princeton. And I remember when I graduated, he told me, "Y no olvides, Cora, lo caribeño." Professor Diaz Quiñones has always been an angel in the background. Most recently, after the devastation of Hurricane Maria, he was instrumental in getting fellowships for professors from the University of Puerto Rico system. His secretary contacted me, but I don't work on Puerto Rican subjects, but I think I've had occasion to tell him that I am working on a Caribbean subject, Francophone Louisiana, one of my research projects. At the last time the cicadas came on campus, I was visiting the library, and at that moment it hit me. I said, Princeton is my mother. I still had my mamita with me in vida, but Princeton was my intellectual mother. I left Princeton feeling calm and mature for the next step, which was to undertake my PhD studies at Yale. There's so much I can say. I could continue. I could talk about typing my senior thesis to El Conjunto Quisqueyas, El Tostón Caliente, because that's what it felt like, un tostón caliente. But I'll stop there.
Thank you, Cora. That was wonderful. I'm going to pass it on to Roberto Barragan.
Afternoon, evening.
Hola.
Thank you. I want to thank you for everyone for their memories and what they're offering to us, and particularly Rick, because I do think that Princeton is both good memories and challenging ones, and at times bad ones, but challenging ones. And you may, like many of you, I was originally class of '82. And that's what I want to speak to for the moment. Many of us coming out of high school in the 70s, many Latinos, Mexicanos, we basically came with the idea that there were two occupations, doctors and lawyers, and we didn't know much in between. And I came in with the idea of being a pre-med. I came with the idea of being a doctor. And my friend and classmate too, compadre Michael Montoya, New Mexico, achieved that. But I came in thinking that I needed to be a doctor. And of course, the first year kicked my ass. And the idea of going to organic chemistry completely kicked my ass. And at that point, I'm in at Frank Ayala's apartment with Anthony Carrick and others, and sitting around going, what the hell am I going to do? And unbeknownst to me, the past previous 10 years of helping my dad with his company meant something. And Frank said, you need to get an MBA. Ah, an MBA. Okay. What does that mean? What's an MBA? Minority, what's an MBA and how do I do that? Well, you know what, you get a degree in something and you go to business school. Okay. And what's a good undergraduate degree to get to business school? Economics. Okay. Sophomore year, Pine Hall. I'm an economics, major. And I get my ass kicked. Okay. And going into junior year, living in Lori Love, now I'm in another semester of economics and my ass kicked. Now, and I think you're going to appreciate this. Come home for Christmas, getting my ass kicked right before finals. I'm at home. And of course, my mother is going through my clothes and sewing them. Holes here, holes there. She's sewing. You can't buy clothes. She's sewing my clothes. She leaves a needle on the floor, which unfortunately I kneel down and the needle is in my knee. And I go back to school with a needle in my knee and off to the infirmary with x-rays. And they're like, well, we don't know if it's going to be a problem or not be a problem. Well, 2 weeks later, it was a problem. So I end up having to have surgery at the infirmary to remove the needle. And while I'm back at the infirmary in recovery, the proctors show up with my "you flunked out" letter. Okay? You flunked out. You need to go home, get your shit together, and maybe we'll let you back in. While I'm in the hospital, I go home and fairly pissed off at myself as much as the school. And I end up enrolling full-time into a local community college to basically get all A's while working full-time to get back into school the next fall, which I do. But I've lost a year now. I've lost a year. That's why I ended up in class of 83. So I end up back at Princeton and living in Holder Hall. Well, Holder Hall is mostly, as you all know, mostly freshmen. But I'm there with Tomas Ortega, who, while he was a fantastic student in Arizona, was completely challenged at Princeton. And me and Tomas lived together for a year in Holder Hall, dealing with all the freshmen around us. And me learning how to write, because now I've decided I'm not an economics major, now I'm a politics major, but my writing sucks. So thank God to all the good professors at Woodrow Wilson and Corwin Hall who taught me how to write, because I came out, writing out of Holder Hall, and now I'm looking at senior year at Princeton. And of course, what do we always want? We either wanted I forget what's called. The white buildings down the street that basically look really beautiful, or Edwards. Because in Edwards, you were right in the middle of campus. Right in the middle of campus, I had a nice Edwards single. And a month into my being there at Edwards, my senior year, 83, my dad calls me up and says, my business is in shambles. I need you to come home. I need you to help me. The guy who was working for me messed it all up. I need you to drive back. Having driven across country, I need to go back. So I drove back. My dad asked me to. Now I'm class of 84. Come back to Princeton, class of 84. And they assigned me a senior into some housing with 3 other guys, freshmen. I don't even remember the building. And thank God for Suzanne Villon. Thank God. Thank you. Okay, she had an administrator housing next to Carnegie Lake. And yes, it was a walk. But you know what? No, you know what? Fine. It was not living with freshmen. Okay, it was me being, in some adult housing. Our buddy, Bobby Vivens. We have this term now. We have this whole term of retreads. Guys who basically didn't graduate in 4 years, but graduated in 5 years, and graduated in 6 years. Okay, and our brother friend Anthony Carrick, who basically left, one semester to go, and decided, came back. So I'm going to graduate with Roberto. So him and I graduated together in class of '84. But and I came back senior year. I graduated. I wanted two things. I wanted my diploma, and I wanted my ring. Okay, and I've worn this ring here for 30 years. And I have a bunch of my friends at Berkeley, where I went to graduate school, asked me, "Why do you have a black stone in your ring? Why is that black?" So that's my experience. This represents my homage to my experience at Princeton. Incredible, challenging, almost defeating, but not quite. Thank you.
Roberto, thank you so much. Now we will hear from Maru Lozano.
What a series of stories to follow. Hi, everybody. This is just so intense. There are faces here that I haven't seen in decades. So I'll try my best to, and like several of you have pointed out, there are so many memories. It's really a challenge to try to keep it to several takeaways, but I'll start here, especially because I'm reconnecting with not only Boricua folks that were from my time there, like Alicia and Maria Pavon, so many memories. And I especially want to highlight that it was being from Puerto Rico and being from an unusual background, which I found it surprising. Cora shares with me. I too, though born and raised in Puerto Rico, my dad was from New York. He was bicultural too. And then my mom is a native of Puerto Rico. So from a very early age, I had to navigate two cultures. My dad was definitely, in terms of identity, very much a proud American before there was such an option as Latino, Latina, Hispanic, etc. And I would say that it was just such a mix of the best and the worst and everything in between, like life itself. But indeed, it's a place where, yes, when you have the opportunity, the life-changing opportunity of attending as a student, in many ways at first, definitely at first in my family, the only reference I had about Princeton was through my mom being a physicist and being a fan of Albert Einstein. That's hardly enough of a reference. So I was very, very lucky that my high school friend Nadia Torres, who unfortunately is not here today, she and I ended up being roommates. And also I was very fortunate to have, like Ricardo and others mentioned, I was invited to join the summer program before entering my freshman year. And it was that pretty much opened a whole new path of being able to become friends with people that I would have never met and would have never been able to be friends with, especially coming from the Chicano background. And whether it be people from Texas or people from California, somebody needs to be muted. Okay. So it showed me not only across Boricua and Chicano lines what was possible in terms of bridging cultures that, in many ways are different, and yet there's an essence. There were enough connecting dots and circumstances that, like Suzanne mentioned, we all have shared the difficulty, the challenge of being tested constantly because it was easy to feel that we were different. And in my beginnings, I had what comes to mind are, especially in those days, those 2 weeks of the summer program, just so many firsts. It was the first time that I was called a minority. I had never heard such a thing. And that was only the start, of course. And then Francisco Pavia, who was also class of 86, coming back from Nassau Street saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe what I just heard." And we were like, "What?" And he told us the story of these two ladies that were in front of Talbot's. And one says to the other, "Oh, that's so middle class." And we were basically very much alarmed by the implications of that. And so that was just in those first 2 weeks, as well as just getting enough of a sense of what we had really signed up for. That though all of us were top of our class, we were about to be thrown into a world that would change us forever. We had no idea how. Some of the ways that we changed, I don't even know if I can really catch them. But I have increasingly gained an appreciation for the fact that in life and in this world, increasingly it's about positioning. And to have gone through this place called Princeton and this experience and to have graduated is also a lifelong game changer, right? It positions us with the many moments that confirm that it is a brand that gives us for life, a level of privilege that's undeniable. Besides that, places and people that just will forever be embedded in my memory include people like, Arcadio, of course, life-changing encounter. He became an angel, like Cora said, or someone else mentioned him as an angel. Indeed, he was. He was also very much a challenger. He made me grow in many, many ways as a young woman and as an emerging scholar. And someone also mentioned, I think it was Alicia, this scholar named Arcadio, this human being, took my work seriously in such a setting, and that just impacts a young mind and a young student in ways that we cannot even imagine back then. I also cannot deny the Third World Center as having playing a decisive role in enabling me to stay. I too took the 5-year route. At another time, I will talk about the Jose Marti portrait and the story behind it, but it definitely involves the Third World Center. It definitely involved a very painful moment that made me paint that portrait. Arcadio is very much connected to that portrait because it was through him that I got to know and learn and discover who Jose Marti really was, beyond the figurehead, the superficial story of Jose Marti that I had learned in high school in Puerto Rico. I also will say that this experience in 2011 after decades of refusing to go back because I had not found a way to pretty much heal what was traumatic about the experience of Princeton. I basically, 25 years into it, for my 25th class reunion of my original class of 86, decided to do the contrary of what I had done for decades, and that was to go back. And it changed my life positively in many, many ways. One of the ways is having this kind of opportunity to reconnect with old folks, old contacts, and again, realize that this is for life. And the opportunities that have emerged even after graduation in recent years of meeting recent grads and just growing the chances of really feeling more and more connected to what Princeton is and who really makes this place what it is. It just keeps growing. I have had finally in recent years, I have had the pleasure of being an interviewer for Princeton, and through that experience, got to see how much the young people still in recent years can change their lives by being allowed to enter. And I do my best to just give myself for 15 to 30 minutes after the interview, and have found the need to just create those opportunities, and how much young people really need those of us who are now their elders to create those conversation opportunities. I will say that right now, where I'm at is I am considered a trusted expert in everything that has to do with Spanish translations, English, Spanish translations of healthcare for Altamed. I'm the person in charge of translations. And my work has definitely many, many times taken me back to what I learned from Arcadio, what I learned from so many people and from other professors, such as the dear Michael Jimenez, and everything that I had pretty much gotten started at Princeton has now blossomed. So even in recent conversations, the chat about Latinx and what we and how we choose to name ourselves has proved to be part of what I can tap into to be now able to advise the organization on how to name our communications, what to use when we have the choices across Latinx, Latino, Latina, and Hispanic. I will close by saying I will just forever be grateful for this second chance, for this Act 3 that I've been a part of, and I'm so glad I made it today. I'm so glad that I got to hear your stories of people that I never met, and that I'm just now beginning to meet this way. Thanks so much.
Maru, thank you so much. We're so grateful. We're getting close to the 1.5 hour mark. I want to ask you to stay on if you don't have other things to tend to immediately, because we're being recorded and there's a list, 6 people left to speak. Next, we have Linda. And after Linda, we have Frank and Felipe. So we'll take it in that order. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Linda. Do I need to pin myself or will someone else pin me? I don't know actually how to do that.
I'll pin you.
Thank you. Yeah, so conscious of the time, I came to Princeton from Poughkeepsie, New York. And if I had to condense what I want to say, honestly, I'm grateful for the opportunity to satisfy an intellectual hunger at Princeton. And I have to say that it was a hunger that my parents were not able to satisfy. My father was the son of Italian immigrants, actually, and extremely bright. And my mother, Mexican immigrant, always wanted to be a doctor, and she was unable to fulfill that dream. But our home was filled with intellectual discussions, and she would say, you have to understand the anatomy of a chicken when she was teaching me to cook. And she would explain that the tub ring was dead cells. And so everything that I was surrounded with led me to hunger for learning. And the second aspect of what I think of when I think of Princeton is the affirmation of not just my mother's dream, but also her faith, because the way I got to Princeton is kind of an interesting story. I grew up, as I said, in Poughkeepsie. I did not actually have any community of Latinos, and it was just, I didn't know of any other Hispanic person actually in Poughkeepsie or in my high school. And so there was this interesting exchange. I wanted to work on creative writing, and so my first pick was Sarah Lawrence. And my father wanted me to go to Vassar because it's right in the hometown. And my sister had gone to Cornell, so I applied there and such. And then one day, morning, my mom woke up and she said, Linda, I had a dream, in her wonderful accent, which I cannot replicate because in truth, because they emphasized English in the home, which is a great, sadness for me. But she said, Linda, I had a dream and God told me you're supposed to go to Princeton. And I can share that here because, many of you will understand that is just something that you better take seriously, and you better believe that God told her in a dream that I was supposed to go to Princeton. And honestly, at that time, I had never heard of Princeton. And so I was like, what's that? And so we go into the file of like all the stuff I'd gotten from colleges, and like, okay, so here's the invitation. Like, you did great on your SATs. Like, we invite you to apply. And I'm like, oh, and I was looking at it. I said, hey, Mom, okay, actually, the application date, it's already passed. Like, I can't do this. So my mom calls up the admissions office and says, excuse me, but my daughter was invited to apply, but she's been sick. And so she has not been able to finish the application. Is it still okay for her to apply? And great admissions people, they said, I don't know if they saw through that story or not, but they said yes. And so I ended up at Princeton from a very strong sense that I was supposed to be there for some reason. And I didn't know what it was. And I, like everyone else said, I found that it was the most challenging experience I had ever experienced. I, for many years, honestly, did not ever want to go back. I pushed my way through. At the same time, my mom was getting very, very sick with heart disease. There was a time, junior year, when she called from the hospital saying that she was on her deathbed. And I fell apart, absolutely fell apart. And it turns out that she is another amazing story. I didn't call back the hospital. My boyfriend called the hospital because I couldn't call. I was a wreck. And she said that my mom got on the phone and said, Jesus healed me. I saw Jesus and he healed me. And when she was supposed to have died, she lived another 8, almost 9 years. But that didn't change the fact that I was a wreck after that. My grandfather died soon afterwards. And I also did not have the means to join eating clubs, and it wasn't going to be my scene anyway. And so those upper class years were very isolated. Wonderful people from Chicano Caucus reached out to me, but I was shy and didn't necessarily take the opportunity up that I could have. And sadly, after I pushed through and managed to graduate, I left to be in the environment, in the circles of my new husband, who was not in any way Latino. And I lost contact with that part of my identity, very deeply lost it. And so for me, the opportunity that ALPA is giving right now is to redefine myself, quite honestly, because after my mom died, that happened even less, of course. And so as a person who loves to write, as a person who wants to connect with others through words and meaningful dialogue, I welcome this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to figuring out what my role might be in all of that. I guess the last thing I will say is that, again, I feel like this is a safe place to say that until now, I was devoted to bringing my children along to where they could flourish. And that's hard for a lot of people to understand, but all of you understand why that mattered. And they, two of them actually went to Princeton and the others to other great schools. But I feel like now, at this point in my life, I have taken up creative writing in a more serious way. And I look forward to seeing what that dream about going to Princeton was all about. Maybe there's more for me to do there. So I thank you all for listening.
Of course, Linda, there's a lot more to do. We're grateful. And now we turn to Frank. Frank Cruz, you want to speak now? Okay. So then we'll go to Felipe, who is next in the queue. Felipe? Hola, I love your background.
Thanks. Yeah, I said that a while back. I guess not having anything better. But wow, so many stories, so many memories. I feel like having listened to Ricardo and to David and my brother. So I actually entered Princeton twice. I guess like Roberto, I was originally 83. Then I took a lot of time off because it was such a shock when he talked about having your ass kicked. I entered as an engineer in 79, 80, and I didn't know what I was doing. Coming from San Antonio, and Frank Ayala was there. I remember attending something after, for those of us who were admitted, Mexicanos, Chicanos from San Antonio, and we met at some hotel. And the thing I remember most was this one alum, and I don't remember who he was. He was an older guy, and all he said was, "I just have one thing to say to you." It's kind of like the plastics thing from The Graduate. It's like, remember where you came from. I was like, I was 17. I was like, how am I going to forget where I came from? I mean, that's ridiculous. But I didn't really understand what he meant until years later. But I was there without Elio Ramirez, who was a roommate of David's. And, I entered, and the reason I say it was like entering two different Princetons, because in 79, 80, there were just two residential colleges. There was Wilson and PIC. And what I quickly learned is that a lot of the minority students at Princeton gravitated to those two residential colleges because they were the only two. And I happened to be in Wilson. I was in 1937 Hall. I was in a suite of 5 guys. And it was an interesting mix, to say the least. I had 2 guys that were from Glen Cove, Long Island, who went to a Friends Academy, which was a Quaker school, a prep school. I had a roommate from New Haven who was Black. I had a Black Haitian roommate who I'll tell about later, and Billy Hansford, some of you may know. And then I had a roommate, a Jewish roommate from Teaneck, New Jersey. And what's funny is that his dad owned a hardware store, and when I met him, he moved into he was like the last one to move into the suite. And I noticed that his dad put a huge chain attached to his little television, attached to a little plastic candle. It was one of his little portable TVs. And I only discovered later that why he did that. And it was because I was right. It was because of me. His parents assumed I was Puerto Rican, and they didn't want me stealing his television. So I was like, whoa. Yeah, that was and then the other roommates who one of the guys from Long Island, he said, I talked to his parents, I told him, Felipe, he's just a regular guy, and I didn't know what to make of that either. It's like, okay, thanks, I guess, So that was just kind of, I mean, landing in Newark, like many of us did, you know, I was fascinated by the accent of the taxi driver. I thought it was like, oh, he sounds just like, the name is escaping me. Telly Savalas, you know, I went with my dad, flew on, I think, Eastern Airlines or Braniff, one of those two that doesn't exist anymore. You know, took a taxi to campus, and I did outdoor action. So, and that was cool. I really appreciated that, being there a week before freshman week, getting to make some friends. None of them were Latino, but that was cool. You know, the leader was from Houston. Of course, he thought Houston was better than San Antonio, but, you know, I'll forgive him for that. But sorry. Anyway, I love both cities. So yeah, being an engineer, it was difficult. I wasn't really prepared, you know, for some of the classes. They were hard. And I remember there was Dean Schaefer at the engineering school, and he sat me down once and said, he said, you know, Felipe, if you're having trouble, think of the classes you're taking as like the initiation to the engineering club. So if you don't like the initiation, you're probably not going to like being in the club. And so with my time off, I went back and I ended up like thinking I was going to be psychology, ended up in philosophy. And I'm just very thankful for the admission experience I got, because once I graduated from Princeton, you know, it's kind of like everyone in philosophy was either going to law school or to some other graduate school. But if you weren't ready to I wasn't ready to go to graduate school. So I ended up in Los Angeles, but, you know, I think I also really enjoyed, it was a big culture shock, but also culture, like horizon, you know, I had never met anyone who was Puerto Rican before I went to Princeton, and, you know, my Spanish was okay. But I remember being invited to a party and having a good time. But as the night progressed, I understood less and less of what was being said. And then I just remember hearing what someone said in one of my feet. One of the women was saying, "Oh, Felipe, you have such a cute Mexican accent." And I said, "No. You have an accent, because you can understand me, but I can't understand you." And anyway, be that as it may, we had a good time. I learned all kinds of words, Puerto Rican words that I had never known. You know, picado, enfogonado, you know, bizcoche, you know, pastel, a whole different kind of pastel, you know, than what I was used to, which that was, for us, it was a cake. But I really appreciated all of that. You know, Dave was talking about salsa. I remember trying to teach myself salsa in my room, you know, my single, listening to some station from Philadelphia or whatever, because, you know, just that was actually the big event, you know, was going to the salsa party. And then when I went back, you know, I was kind of the older guy, you know, I was the one who would, you know, I could, you know, rent a car and not have to pay an exorbitant amount. So we'd go traveling, you know, went to Knox in Michigan, which is National Association of Chicano Scholars, I think it is. And that was actually the first time I actually identified as Chicano, because until then I didn't really know, you know, like Javier was saying, I like barely realized I was Mexican American, because I was like, I'm an engineer, I'm apolitical, you know. And I went to one caucus event my first year, and I said, well, I really enjoy this socially, you know, I just don't know about the other stuff, you know, and in terms of the politics and everything. But as time went on, you know, I thank God for people like David Avalos and, you know, Arcadio, the faculty. I mean, talk about having your eyes open, you know. And David Avalos' course, one of the books we read was Chicano Revolt in a Texas Town, which was about Crystal City, which is 30 miles south of San Antonio. And, this was something that happened at the end of the 60s. And I had no idea. Like, I had never heard of this. This was not in any of our Texas history books, and we were just talking on Facebook recently about how it's funny how you have to go, how much you learn. And even though it was such an alien environment, I feel blessed that we were able to learn about our culture through key people like that, like David and Arcadio. I took a Latin American literature class with Arcadio, and it just, Eduardo Batia was in there. I think there was a bunch of people in there, and it was just really awesome to be able to take a course like that with Arcadio, and explore literature from all over Latin America. So it kind of gives you perspective, historically, and culturally, reading books from people from Argentina, and it was just great. So I had kind of when I left Princeton, I kind of had a love-hate relationship with it. As it turned out, I met and married someone from Hightstown, New Jersey. She's Puerto Rican. She was born in Trenton, New Jersey, and we'd go to her house in Hightstown and go over to Princeton, and I'd get to visit the campus and kind of do the old routine of going to Hoagie Haven and eating a hoagie at TWC while it was still there. So I kind of miss those days. But anyway, now I work in IT. I feel like I was one of these people that I didn't really want to use my Princeton connections, the alumni network. But when I left Los Angeles and moved back to San Antonio, I had 2 kids. I had no job. And my wife said, look, they're having an alumni dinner at the Alamo. You'd be a fool not to go. So I did, and I got a job that way. And so just to me, that was kind of like a stepping stone of accepting, kind of Princeton as part of my life and part of my professional life too, because I always said, I would tell people they'd say, where do you go to school? Or I said, I went to school in New Jersey. I didn't want to. And part of that was because every time I tell people I went to Princeton, they're like, well, what do you do now? And be like, you're not like Roberto was saying, you're not a doctor or lawyer. What's wrong with you? So I just was always wanting to avoid that conversation. But after a while, I owned it. It was just like, it's like not all of us are become doctors or lawyers, or engineers. Anyway, I think I've said enough. So I'll hand it back over.
Gracias, Felipe. We're so grateful. We have Martin and John. I know John has to get on at 8:30. I don't know, Martin, if you want to give him a chance to go so he can, and then you can trade spaces. Is that okay with you, Martin? All right. Well, John Moran. Well, and then after that is Imelda and Inocencia. Hola, John.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you to everybody at ALPA. This is a wonderful event. It's great to reconnect on so many levels. Some of you I knew at Princeton, others I've met later, others I've never met, but I feel like we're connected here. And so it's a wonderful experience. Now, I'm going to keep it short because I do have to run off in a minute, but I feel like, much of what I've been hearing, I can very much relate to, the kind of tribulations, the opportunities, the widening of horizons, all of that, I feel happened in my own life. And in fact, I would sum it up as everything I needed to know in life, I learned at Princeton, right? And so these days, I went to grad school at Stanford in English literature. I'm now a full professor at the University of Texas at Austin, but I'm very much involved in the kind of same issues, the same struggles that today's college students have, Latinx college students have, first generation college students have. And I'm working on my university's transition to Hispanic serving institution status. And I have to give a real shout out to Modesta Garcia, if she's still here, because we're using the same tactics, the same kind of recruitment strategies that I learned, and I was a student recruiter back then too, like many of you were. And so I just feel that the experience has just informed my life in a way that, for a long time, like many of you, I felt deeply ambivalent about. I was like, I'm not going there. I'm not sending any money there. I'm not having to do anything with it. And until both Time and Perspective and Adelante Tigres, that event kind of like, oh, maybe I should rethink that. And so anyway, really, I'm just going to keep it there, short and sweet. But it's wonderful to see everyone, and I hope we'll get a chance to reconnect in person as circumstances allow.
All right, Longhorn Moran Gonzalez. I'll turn it over to Martin Gutierrez.
Okay. My name is Martin Gutierrez now. I combined it with my wife's name. So my kids are all Gutierrez. I got 5 kids, 5 beautiful kids. I just want to start by saying, unlike most of you, I wasn't the first to go to college in my family. My oldest sister had gone to LMU. And of course, my sister Veronica was a senior when I came in as a freshman there. I had already applied to, well, actually I didn't apply. My high school had on-the-spot admission at UC Berkeley at the time. This was in October, November of my senior year. So I got admitted on the spot, and then I was ushered out of the room and taken to another room, and my financial aid packet was set up. So I was going to UC Berkeley by the time I was in November, December, my senior year. But then Veronica came home for Christmas break, and she convinced me to apply. She wanted me to apply. She said, you got to get out there. You got the grades. You got to apply. I didn't really want to go to Princeton. I applied. My essay was written was handwritten to apply to Princeton. I didn't find out till later when I submitted my application in early February that Silvia Hurtado was my sister's roommate. So I got into Princeton, and I had promised my sister that if I got into Princeton, I would go. So I went to Princeton. It was the first time in my family. My dad had 12 sets of encyclopedias in our house. This is before the internet. So I was working full-time in high school, and anytime I needed to do a paper or anything else in high school, this is before I knew what plagiarizing was. I wrote papers, and I got through high school pretty easily. I went to Princeton, and it wasn't so much the schooling, it was the culture shock. My sister was very right in not being real honest about what was going on in Princeton and what to expect as a Latino student over there. I was a Chicano student. One of the things I would like to mention is that, especially if we're trying to recruit other students to Princeton, we can't be too honest about all our experiences over there. I know a lot has changed, but of my 5 children, none of them wanted to apply to Princeton because of the stories they heard from me. They had 2 graduated from USC, and my youngest is at MIT now. So that's one thing that, there are stories out there, and I know we got some writers here, both Davids. You guys are writers. These are great stories. It would make a great movie compared to what's out there. But as far as a recruiting tool, I try to stay away from my Princeton stories as much as possible. I took my first year off. My sophomore year, I took off. I was there. My freshman year, I went in August 8th, where I met Ricky and everybody else at the summer program. And I didn't come home until December 18th. First time I ever been away from home. First time I ever been on a plane, and I landed in Newark. So my sister, my oldest sister, who worked for Mexicana at the time, she was able to be on standby and got on standby on the flight to accompany me to Princeton. Otherwise, I would have been on my own. I would have been lost. I would have been lost in Newark. So we ended up going to Princeton. I got there late after dinner, going to PSC for the summer program. And that's where I met Ricky and everybody else. I remember the 3rd day I was there, I called my mom and I said, I want to go home. This isn't for me. I can still go to Berkeley. I want to go home. And Veronica got on the phone. She wasn't there yet. And she said, come on, dude, get some balls, man. You got to stay there. You got to work it out. And sure enough, I stayed. And my biggest inspiration when I went back was Roberto Barragan. I saw this guy that had so much energy. And I thought I was, King Chicano that went out when the year he took off. And he came in with so much energy with the Chicano press organization and everything. And I said, I got to stay. I got to stay here and hammer it out. So I stayed at Princeton, ended up coming home. I wanted to be an engineer. That wasn't in the books. All my 3 kids are engineers, but that wasn't in the books for me. The high school that I went to didn't offer any AP courses. And now they offer 26. So my kids went there and they were able to put through, and it's a lot easier for them now than it was for me. But I did get politically active, very politically active at Princeton. The Chicano Caucus was one of the spearhead organizations that could go out there and handle issues. I remember getting arrested for apartheid protests. 5 Chicanos got arrested. More than black students got arrested that one time in 1986, I think it was. I was a caretaker at GWC and a chairperson, co-chairperson my senior year there. I was very sad that it was taken away, TWC. I was more sad that I heard the reason it was taken away was because the students didn't want to affiliate themselves with Third World anymore. So that was kind of like what happened. I had kind of distanced myself from Princeton. I kind of got back to when Ricky moved to LA, and he pretty much introduced me to the whole concept of Princeton again, and what it is and what should be done. When I came out of Princeton, I started working in the political world. And a couple of campaigns, Javier Becerra, Secretary of Health and Human Services, I did his first campaign. He paid me $25 a week to do his first campaign. That was way back when he ran for assembly. Alex Padilla, I helped him out in the Senate, in his Secretary of State campaign when he was here. He graduated from MIT and was involved in the East Coast Chicano Student Forum. Now he's the senator from California. Gloria Molina, she was the lone Chicana out here in LA politics, and I worked on all 3 of her victorious campaigns for City Council, for Assembly, City Council, and Supervisor. So all in all, it was a great experience in that aspect of it that Princeton gave me, especially in the political world, so much confidence. When people heard, especially all these other guys that worked all these other campaigns, that, well, you went to Princeton, suddenly the tone changed. And it was kind of unfair, but I took advantage of it. We went ahead and won some brilliant campaigns. I just want to say that the new students that are there, I've been away for a while. Hasn't really been intentional, but I really hadn't been pushed to go to it. If it wasn't for people like Ricky De Leon and I still call him Ricky. He'll always be Ricky to me. And all the other people that were there, Debbie Villalon, Suzanne's sister, the first year that we were there. We survived together. We huddled together and we survived. I mean, it was all a shock to all of us. The one experience I do want to say, and I told this to Ricky, I remember once the summer program we were there, I had never experienced humidity like that before. Out here I was in my Levi's from California, LA, creased down the middle like they would out here with my Nike Cortez. And I'm walking across campus to Frick Hall to go see the summer movies that were there. And I reach into my pocket and I pull out a $10 bill and it's wet, soaking wet because it's sweat. And I didn't know it was going to get that wet, So I gave my money to the white girl that was in front of me, and she made a big stink about it, and she threw it back to me, right? And I'm like, what do I do now? So that was the first time I ever experienced anything like that. It was funny because I went by Martin, that was my name, and anybody I told that my name was Martin, they said, "Oh, are you French?" 4 or 5 times that happened to me at Princeton. I guess I don't look like a Mexican, but they would say, "Oh, are you French?" And I was always respond, "No, I'm Chicano." That's a Chicano name, and they wouldn't know what it was. It was interesting. Another story when the Cloister Hall, right across from TWC, across the street from TWC, Cloister Hall had a south of the border party, and you had to crawl underneath to get in. They put a fence up. So we went there and we spoke to the people, and the first guy apologized. The second guy came out and pretty much said no apology was needed. We wrote a big old thing in the Princeton Weekly, and luckily most people came down on our side of it. But it was pretty sad to see the ignorance as far as Latinos there at Princeton. These are smart people, and why could it be? They were supposed to be smart people. How can it be like this? It was also the time where the number one song in the nation was Born in East LA. So I was like, that was we were combining both. He's like, wow, I'm from East LA, but I'm here at Princeton, and it was just a big old mix up as far as who we were and who we were struggling to identify as. But all in all, Michael Lopez, everybody else at Princeton, they're the ones that Cesar Gallego, Cesar, Maria Pavon, Cesar was in love with your sister Frances. He would call her La Gitana.
La Gitana.
So he was there, and we all pulled together. I mean, if it wasn't for all of us putting together, I don't think many of us would have made it through. And it wasn't just that we were all Chicanos. We were family. You know, Puerto Ricanos, Millie, my beloved Millie, man. She was such a firebrand, Milagros, and she's the one that pretty much was snapping in our heads, you know, stop drinking and stop doing this and get your shit together. And that's how we did, and we got through. I would like to share more stuff, but David Portillo and David Ayon, you guys are writers, man. We got to put this down and put a book together on this stuff. Very great stories here. So thank you, guys. Nice seeing most of you again.
Thank you so much. Now we have Imelda Inocencia, and our final speaker will be Modesta herself. Okay, so Imelda Inocencia and Modesta, turning it over to you.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Okay. So I guess like most of you, first time I flew was to go to Princeton, but I'm from Indiana. So that was a little bit different. I got there and there were the whole California contingent and the Texas contingent. And so even though my family is from Texas, still Indiana, born and raised. So, but I went there. Like I said, the first time I ever flew was to go to Princeton. And again, it was on one of those airlines that no longer exists. I think it was, I don't know, I can't remember, whatever. It was something that doesn't exist anymore. And I also worked in food services, lots and lots of hours. I was in Butler College, and luckily pretty soon after being at college, I got a job with student employment. And that was pivotal for me because I was now in the office and I didn't have to do that many dishes. I didn't need to work on food services much. And it also led me to a couple of amazing opportunities that I was able to get at Princeton. And the first one was that across the hall from student agencies was student employment. And this lady who worked in student employment really liked me. And she said, do you speak Spanish? And I said, yes. She said, do you want to go to Spain? And I said, what's the catch? And she said, well, there's an American family who's going to Spain and they need a companion and tutor for their daughter. And I was like, let me apply. So I went to apply. There were these people who lived in a suburb and they had a 13-year-old daughter, and they wanted a companion tutor for her for the summer. They were going to the Spanish Riviera, and they wanted somebody who could drive and somebody who could play tennis, and I could do neither one of those. But they picked me anyway, because they said that, I spoke Spanish and that was never going to fail me in a time of an emergency. So it was perfect. So that was my first, it started out after my freshman year. That was, a trip I took for free. They were very wealthy, and, we stayed at all the nice places. We were at, at the Granada and the castle of King Ferdinand, Queen Isabella. I mean, we just stayed all these wonderful places. And then at the end of my 4 years at Princeton, right at the very end, I was with a friend of mine, and I was bragging about my fabulous singing voice, even though I didn't do any singing while I was at Princeton because I had my nose to the grindstone. And so I was bragging to her, and I said, and she was with another friend. She had another friend with her, and her friend said, I'm in the Glee Club. She said, do you have you heard about our summer tour? And I'm thinking she wants me to go to, Kentucky, because I'm from Indiana. She wants me to go somewhere and see them. And I was like, oh, no, I haven't heard. And she said, we're going to Australia and New Zealand. She said, do you want to apply? And so now I had to put my money where my mouth was because I was talking myself up pretty good. And so I applied and I got into the Glee Club. And right after graduation, like the week after graduation, we went on a tour to Australia, New Zealand, Tahiti, Moorea. And again, that was all free, thanks to Princeton's Glee Club. And now every time I go to any sort of Chicago, Princeton event, the Glee Clubbers are all over me because, I'm in the group, I'm in the club. So that was pretty exciting. I think one of the things that I had, and in fact, I tell my daughter who's going to Cornell, I tell them, the main thing was when I went to Princeton was I had an overabundance of confidence, which was completely unwarranted. I mean, there was no reason why I should have had that much confidence, but I did. And I think that I needed that confidence because that's what really put me through all of these things that people are talking about, feeling, maybe, somewhat inferior or not prepared. I was clearly not prepared, but it didn't matter. I still did fine. And I think that it was I told myself at some point, I said, all of these admissions officers have seen everybody in the country, in fact, everybody in the world who's applied, and they have decided that I'm good enough. So if Princeton thinks I'm good enough, I'm good enough. And so you cannot convince me otherwise. And so I think that really helped me. And I think that there were very few doubts in my mind while I was going through. And yeah, everything wasn't easy. And I had, there were some struggles definitely, but those are all way back in my memory now. Those don't, my friends who I met the first week of the summer program, they're still my best friends now. And, going back to the Adelante Tigres, I mean, that was amazing seeing everybody. Seeing Ricky in Chicago was great. It was like, oh my God, it was just a time, time warp. But so in any event, I remember all the great things of Princeton. There's a few things that were annoying or that I didn't like, but I try not to dwell on those. And after Princeton, I worked at a couple civil rights organizations in DC for a couple years. And then I went to law school at Michigan. And then I went into the Peace Corps. I was in Africa. I taught English in Namibia. And then came back to Chicago, and I've been working with the Department of Labor. I'm an attorney with the Federal Department of Labor. And I have two daughters, and one of them's at Cornell, the other one's in high school. So.
Emelda, overabundance of confidence is what these need. So the world needs that. Turn it over to Inocencia and then Modesta.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be hearing all these stories, and they've brought up so many different feelings. I came to Princeton, entered class of 85. I landed there in 85, class of 89. Kind of a untraditional background because I was born and raised in the Virgin Islands, father Puerto Rican, mother from the islands. And I did not speak Spanish. And originally, also, I was not going to be going to Princeton. So I didn't get on all the lists of who to be part of and the TWC list and everything. I also so that affected my Princeton experience. My experience was also affected because unlike a lot of you, I didn't have the family support. My family, just around my senior year, started to implode on several levels. And that affected the experience throughout. One of the big things that kids today may not understand was trying to keep it all together. The phone calls to the Virgin Islands from Princeton ended up that I was working to pay the phone bill a lot of times. And, now you have these all-inclusive plans. That was not the deal. And it was a baptism by fire with a whole, not just the academics. I mean, my high school did not have a high graduation rate. And you could count on two hands the number of students who went to very competitive universities. Landing on campus, first time having strawberries or eating mushrooms or blintzes, and hearing about affirmative action. Very first time my roommate moved into the room, first comment she made was, or rather the second was, "My father doesn't believe in affirmative action." Okay, this is going to be an interesting freshman year. But one of the big things, like a lot of you that made a difference, was the FSOP program, the summer program. And I ended up there and ended up at Princeton because in the 70s group, some people had mentioned about the PrEP program, which was for pre-med bound students, that was being led by this amazing woman, Alice Miller, put together. And when I landed there, right off the bat, it was very clear that I didn't have the family support, that things were breaking down, and that I was going to be facing a lot of new changes. And originally I was bound for MIT, and she took me aside and she said, "I think you need another environment that's going to be more nurturing and supportive. MIT, you'll go there, the very first thing you'll have to do is find housing with their rush, and only 25% of the population are women. And at Princeton, it'll be more supportive. So you got in there. I can still make a call and switch you if you'd like." And it was one of the best things that happened for me on several levels. So first thing when I got to Princeton, the very first person I met was Rochelle Robinson. She was at that time Moore, and now she's Rochelle Robinson Hendricks. And I haven't heard her name come up before, but she was life-saving for me. She right away had spoken with Alice Miller, took me under her wing, so to speak. And my first year, she would meet with me one-on-one to make sure, hey, how are things going and everything. And she was just incredibly supportive. I don't know if any of you remember her, and she was a champion for minorities, for women, for the gay lesbian students on campus who were just starting to have an emerging voice. When she left, her position was basically replaced by 2.5 people, her one position from the Dean of Students' office. And I had the experience of encountering not one, but 2 deans of colleges, the one my freshman year, and then the one my junior year, who I approached at points for extensions above in time. And because I was overwhelmed and I was scared because I didn't have an option of bailing out, of having to take a leave because going home was not there. And the very first dean of the college that I had to go and ask for the extension, she didn't want to hear my story. She basically said, "Now, Cynthia, it wouldn't be fair if I gave you that extension. Everybody else has gotten all their work in on time. Your people are just going to have to figure out how to make it here on campus." And I had one of my one-on-one sessions with Rochelle Robinson Moore, and I went to speak with her just about general things with the family and how that was working. And it's the type of thing that counselors and therapists hate. My hand is on the door handle. And she said, "Well, this was just before what would have been our last meeting for the Christmas break." And I started to break down because she said, "I'll see you in the next semester." And I thought, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. So she heard what was going on. She knew I was managing crazily 3 different part-time jobs. And she knew I was working on the projects. And she said, "I'll handle this." And she called the professor. She got the extension. And the professor called me and said, "No problems. You can have it in by this date. Everything's fine." That made me able to get through that semester, because I would have been out on the grounds of not having gotten stuff in by Dean's date. But it also made it very clear that I was walking into a minefield between certain people in the dean of the college office and certain people in the rest of the institution that felt there were reasons to be more supportive of diversity. And that dean wasn't the first person that I came across like that. There was another one at another point. And other people in that case stepped in and were supportive. I'm very appreciative of those people who were there, but it made it very clear that when you have an institution that's going through changes, the top may have, the top administration may come that this is in the institution's interest to go in a certain direction, but you're going to have several different layers that may not have buy-in. And it takes time and it takes work. And now with the whole push that's going on in academia and in companies, I'm seeing the same thing play out. There were other areas where Princeton at that time had work to do. It had been relatively co-ed for a short period of time. And the counseling center only had the equivalent of, I think it was 1.5 counselors who were female. And they were dealing with all the sexual assaults on campus, that they didn't have the bandwidth to deal with a lot of other issues, such as eating disorders, such as family issues, such as anything else that anyone brought. And it made it all the harder for if you came on campus and you needed help and guidance. The financial aid office also, they didn't take into account if you were coming from a tropical island or if, a plane trip back to the islands, what that meant. They only budgeted for you to go back once a year, but if they did, when I filled out the FAFSA, I thought, well, I can't put down that my family can't put anything down, include anything. So I crazily put in that somehow I would manage to scrape together $1,000 towards this big cost. And when I had to go and say, no, it's not happening, especially since things had not worked out, the guy nonchalantly at the financial aid office said, oh, we didn't think you could do it. So, but you said you could. So now you have a loan instead of financial aid. So that was a hard lesson to learn that way. There were other people other than Rochelle Robinson. Manuel Del Valle's class was very supportive. There were other people in the I ended up being a minority affairs advisor, recruited to do that. And that was very supportive. Network at that time, and some incredible students who I met along the way. And I think the university was trying to make changes and has made so many. I was very proud of Princeton when it took the lead on no loan financial aid. And I'm also really proud of the direction we're trying to diversify and reach out to first-gen students. And hopefully they're recognizing that students are going to come in who can do the work, but they've been strivers and they're going to come in with issues that they'll need some help or some guidance. That is very different than prep school students. And just to acknowledge too, Princeton, my sense, that wasn't the path they were going to take at first. At first they were like, okay, let's diversify the class. And then when they realized that so many were having a hard time with it, it's like, let's go to the safer path of getting the students through the prep school so they would have already been acclimated and they'd be more likely to come through. And I see the same thing now with my sons and their school environments. They attended private schools, and these private schools also trying to switch to certain families that they will feel more comfortable to get through. And it's like, no, you're defeating the whole purpose of diversity if you're not looking at the whole picture. And I find myself now, after Princeton, I ended up, while at Princeton, I often was with international students because they were there during breaks, ended up marrying one. He ended up getting a PhD at Princeton, of all places. So I never left Princeton until 94 in terms of living there, and had a long perspective. I worked in Trenton with an education outreach program and helping students to get into college, including the first student to go to Princeton from Trenton High in over 10 years, Fiona Bernal, who then went on to get a PhD from Yale in African Studies. And the funny thing is, she crossed paths with many of the people who were not supportive of my experience, including a professor who refused to let her go on a trip to Africa in her class that everybody else was going on because he said she wasn't ready. And ironically, she's the only person from that class that went on to actually study African studies. But yes, after working there, I got an MBA at Columbia because the plan was that was the degree that would be most useful in Sri Lanka, where my husband's from, and we were going to move there. The war changed that. We never moved to Sri Lanka. And right now I live in Berkeley with my husband, my two sons, and end up often with build in different projects that call for me to build for different institutions and so forth. So thank you for doing this project. Thank you for hearing the stories. And it cuts the isolation. And it also highlights there were a lot of good. I just quickly want to highlight, certain people that aren't on, but they were key there. Rudy Mata, Vivian Rivera, who is the person that Wendy Kopp often cites as the roommate that was inspirational to her. She was with me at Rudy Mata was my husband's year. Vivian and Harold Fernandez were my year at FSOP. Veronica Armijo, Frankie, Ricky Escobar, Nimachia Hernandez. And one other person that hasn't been mentioned is Yvette Santiago Soto, who was so patient, so supportive. And unfortunately, I recently learned passed away. Thanks again, everyone.
Inocencia, thank you for sharing that story. We'll turn it over to Modesta.
Hi. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. First of all, thank you for bringing me into the ALPA group, even though I'm not a Princetonian by degree. However, I am by memory and by heart because of the wonderful experiences I had there. Okay, they were not all wonderful. Remember, I worked in admissions. To be clear, not all wonderful, but the people that I met there, the students I worked with, amazing. And I can tell you, first of all, I stand on the shoulders of you alumni from the 70s, because while you were protesting at Princeton, there were others across the country, as you know. Sorry? So there were others across the country, right, in the 70s protesting so that people like myself, my generation, could have that opportunity. And so thank you, class of 70s. Excuse me. I also did, from the last presentation, I was asked to present in this session, so I just wrote down a few notes. So please bear with me. You'll notice that my eyes are darting all over the screen. Okay. Here's an admissions perspective. When the occasion arises, I do not hesitate to mention that I have the deepest respect for Princeton alumni. First of all, I saw the hoops you had to jump through to get in. I was in the room where it happened. Second, you're like one of two schools in the nation that has to write a senior thesis, and the other school is not as selective as Princeton. So these elements are just a reason for me to sing your praises and to admire the work that you've done and admire your successes, because I have been on all sides of the admissions table and higher education table to appreciate what you go through to have received a degree from Princeton. So I salute you all. Another thing, Frank Ayala. I heard of Frank Ayala in the late 70s in graduate school housing at Harvard. One of my peers down the hall, Valerie Bell, class of 77, Princeton, was the first African-American and first woman to be senior class president. So we were in the same floor in graduate housing. And, of course, she found out I was Mexican-American and asked if I knew Frank Ayala. I didn't at the time. It took about 20 years before I met him. But I'd heard so many wonderful things about Frank Ayala and was quite familiar to me by the time I started my job at Princeton in 1985. Another thing, and again, I'm glancing at my notes in the interest of time. Okay, I want to start with my job interview there at Princeton. It was spring of 85. I was there for a few days, and I remember asking one of the administrators about the Third World Center, and he was class of 60, white male, of course, and he replied that's that place. It's like that's where the student radicals hang out. And I thought that's all I need to hear, and I made a beeline to the Third World Center, and of course I was warmly welcomed by students there. And when I think back to that day and that experience, I often wonder, was that you I met there? Michelle Robinson Obama? Were you one of those radicals? Probably. So that's that was my introduction to Third World Center. Of course, once I started working there, it became a second home to me, and it was a place of comfort, as someone earlier mentioned. I must say, I have a shout out for the dean that I worked for, Dean of Admission, Tony Cummins. It was wonderful working with him. Any requests that I had for Chicano recruitment, minority recruitment, he honored. He was very, very supportive. And I recall there were often times when I'd come back from staff meetings, and we would meet on second floor, and our offices were on first floor. And Tony and I, our offices were at opposite ends of the hallway. So we'd walk together to our respective offices, or sometimes. And he'd often see a line of Chicano students waiting outside my office for me. And one day he mentioned it, and he said, I see that when we come back from staff meetings, there are these lines of students waiting to see you. And I didn't know where he was coming from. I was still very new. And I got a little testy, and I said, well, Tony, I know it's hard to do admissions, not student services. And, when I'm meeting with students, that's part of student services and retention. And I said, but I'm getting my work done in admissions. And I'm able to do these things with the students, current students, because I'm also working on weekends. And I said, don't you remember on Labor Day, you and I were the only ones here in the office. So I know what I need to do, and I'm getting my job done. And he was always so kind and just so sensitive. And he said, that's not why I'm making this statement. I'm concerned about you. You're being pulled in so many directions because you're doing admissions and you're doing certain services. And he said, how can I support you? And those words were just golden, and that certainly made up for a lot of challenges that I experienced at Princeton. And I recall working with alumni, right? I heard of David Ayon. I'd heard of Roberto Barragan through my admissions work. And of course, as a Chicano recruiter, I was recruiting in the Southwest and recruiting in other areas where there were high numbers of students of color. One experience that's memorable is how I had to walk a fine line. You want to support students and let them know you're supporting students. And I might add, I had a career in higher education for about 30 years. So I've worked across the country and with students in various capacities. But then you have to walk a fine line between supporting students and supporting administration and doing your job. And then you also had to walk a fine line working with alumni, especially alumni from different backgrounds. And there was one city, which shall remain nameless, where same city, and I visited the schools where there were the low income, high minority enrollments, as well as the wealthier white institutions. And so one day, the alumnus that represented the white institutions said to my dean, why is it that you always send a junior admission officer to visit our schools? We never get the senior admission officer. In other words, why are you sending the Chicana and not the white recruiter to our schools in the north, one of the north part of town, the affluent area? In the same city, then when I visited the Chicano area, the facility, the main cultural institution for that city, then I got slack from the Chicano community. They went to the dean and they said, we can't relate to her. She's wearing pearls to our sessions in our community. And I thought, can't they tell they're faux pearls? So anyway, I had to walk all these lines, right? I was balancing but I survived. So that was a really interesting experience. Again, I'm just, looking back at my notes in the interest of time. Part of the recruitment effort was wonderful, having the student recruiters, right? It was fall break. And so the university would pay some students to go and recruit in their areas. And that was so wonderful to be able to visit high schools that you came from and to visit with your families, meet your parents. Such a wonderful experience. And there were times too, and I know John Gonzalez is not with us on the Zoom anymore, but when I had asked his parents to attend a session that I was giving in their community, and I asked her for the peer support and asked her to address the parents, to talk about what it was like to have a parent, to be a parent and in Texas, having your child going to a school like Princeton. So those are just wonderful memories, meeting families throughout the country as I visited different high schools. Getting back to Chicano Caucus, I was welcomed with open arms. And as I hear your experiences, whether you're an alum from the 70s or the 80s, and, I hear about the isolation, the cultural divide, peers from another world, where are the Mexican restaurants? That is so relatable. I went through the same experience as an administrator. And not only was I the only Mexican American working in the office, I was the only Mexican American working at the university. And I succeeded Sylvia Hurtado. I think she was the first Chicana recruiter, class of 80, and Suzanne Villalon and Aurelio Ramirez. And so my experience was different because unlike the alumni, I didn't have that community already in place. But I found that community with the Chicano Caucus and the Third World Center, and for that I'm grateful. And I also realized that, this was an isolated experience. I had the stories, and there were times then that I started. By the way, I hear some noise, static. Am I coming through okay? Okay, thank you. So I realized that, okay, we're a community, we're a family. And I started hosting potluck dinners at my home, at my apartment on Hib and McGee on Saturdays. And that was a lot of fun, because you have different students from different backgrounds, and they just get into the kitchen and come up with these original creations. Delicious and very, very creative. Support systems. Through the students, I met Ruth Simmons, and she took me under her wing. And I also met Manuel del Valle, and I know that they were both very supportive of students, and they were people that I could turn to get some support for some of the challenging times I was experiencing there. It's been wonderful having kept in touch with a lot of students and getting to meet their families. And, as I heard earlier, hearing some of you speak about your children in college, I can hardly believe that. That just makes me feel like so senior, because I knew you all when you're in college. Now your children are in college. It's such wonderful stories. So wonderful to hear that. Also, when students were in the area, after I left Princeton, I returned to the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and I was offered a job at my alma mater. I community college nursing school dropout. So my first entry into higher education was at a community college. And then I met this Chicano counselor who inspired my career in higher education. And I always said to him, when you retire, I want to take your job as the counselor at this community college. So I was at Princeton. He'd been promoted, and his job as the only bilingual counselor on campus was open. So I applied and I was offered the job. And so I was there almost 25 years and retired. And any former student that I'd met at Princeton who was visiting that, alerted me to their visit, I certainly want to meet with them, and I did. And I remember one time sharing a story with a student about how, I attended the Chicano caucus parties at the Third World Center because I figured, well, I'm an advisor, might as well go, and I want to be there to support the students. But also, I admit, I am not a dancer. I am not. But I thought, oh God, here I am, administrator. I should at least participate at that level. Get on the dance floor and do what I can. And there was always this one student who would slide up to me, and he would mock my dance steps. I'm like doing my best, and he is mocking my dance steps. And I was communicating that to a student who was visiting me here in San Francisco. He goes, oh yeah. He goes, you know what? He used to do that at study breaks. I was the entertainment at study breaks. So those are the fun stories. This brings me to the graduation. My first graduation there was 1986, and I had graduated from Santa Clara University, and we had Chicano graduations, and we had the sashes. We used to wear the sashes, and I thought, wow, we need to do this at Princeton. So I had the support from Tony, the dean, and of course Chicano caucus and students, and students went out and got funding from different departments, and somebody found a mariachi in the Bronx. So they performed, and we had the first dinner there at Third World Center. And it was just so special to have the families there and to meet the families and the children and the siblings of our graduates. And it was a very small group, maybe about a dozen students. And it was very special. So I thought, okay, next year graduation, this worked out. So, and Imelda, you were such a great help. You were like right there helping. You're like co-executive producer. Thank you. And I thought, oh, this was so much fun, so successful. Let's do it again. So we did it, class of '87, and this time it was in Wig Clio, and we had speakers like Manuel del Valle and Ruth Simmons. And it was very special. And I'll never forget the closing at that second ceremony when one of the students walked up to me and he said, at that Chicano graduation ceremony, he said, this is the first time I feel like I belong at Princeton. And that was on his way out. And of course, we remember, right, when you hear Michelle Obama speak about her experiences, that was something she had said about being at Third World Center. And that was the only time that she felt like she belonged at Princeton. And I'll tell you, having had this career in higher education, this still happens. I heard it from students, and I now mentor students, and I high school and college students, and I'm a college planner. So I still hear these students. And we've come a long way, but we have so way much more to do to work with our students today and to help them feel like they belong on these campuses. And I'm glad to hear that you share your stories and that a lot of you are still working with high school students. And but I'm not happy to hear that these are still happening. These experiences still happen. But I know that as the committed Latinos that you are, that you will continue to encourage students and share your stories with them and let them know that they're not alone. And that the one takeaway that I have for students is just reach out and find that mentor, whether it's it doesn't matter their background, just somebody who cares for you and somebody who encourages you, right? And somebody who will support you. And so it's just heartwarming to hear everybody's story and to hear stories and to hear that you're still wanting to mentor the next generations. Sorry. Okay. I think. May I just add one more thing? And one more thing. This is my takeaway from having worked at Princeton admissions, even though I previously had worked at Santa Clara admissions and I have a master's from Harvard, but it was Princeton that gave me tools for my mentor toolbox. It was because I was in the room where it happened. I observed what it took to get in, that I was able to return to the community college and help prepare students at the community college to transfer and to go to graduate school and the Ivy League and sister schools and Stanford because of the tolls that I acquired at Princeton. And of course, community college, a lot of low-income students of color. So that has, made everything worth it, that I am able to take what I learned at Princeton and pass it on to the next generations. And thank you for this opportunity.
No, and thank you, Modesta. The last 2 hours, even though I was gone for like half an hour, have been absolutely amazing. And there's been a couple of references about I'm not a storyteller. And no, everyone I heard and those that I didn't hear from because I was out that half hour, we are storytellers. And our stories do matter. And I'm going to do another commercial for Recuerdos on please do document some of these items. And we'll have this video and we'll keep this video, but these stories are so important and they can really make a difference for that new kid coming on campus next fall to understand what we have gone through and to learn about it, to learn how we survived. And we survived and we thrived. And I think Suzanne put it on the chat on we fought and we lost and we won. Because we did. I mean, look at it. I mean, I am so proud to be part of this group. And it kicked my butt. I said it before, but we all ended up standing and we are here to support each other now all the more than we were even then. Because then we were all kids. And now we're wise. We're the wise Latino and the wise Latina. And we have stories to tell. And to that effect, I mean, so please write these down. Oral histories are something that WANA is coordinating and that could be available. Contact WANA and let us know whether you'd be interested in doing an oral history. And I'm sharing right now the timeline. This is about to get published, but the Recuerdos project hired an intern to document from the Daily Princetonian. So if it's wrong, blame the Princetonian, don't blame the effort. But we have like this history, this timeline with the direct reference to the Princetonian article that documents every time our interns could find the word Acción Puertorriqueña, Chicano Caucus, Hispanic, Mexican American. Anytime they heard those key words in the Princetonian, they captured the article, and you could go directly into the article and read what was printed in the Princetonian at that time, and you can comment on it. You can comment on, I was there, and this is what it felt like. You can add a picture to it. There's all these different capabilities in the timeline that's about to be published and available for everyone. But the Recuerdos project is going to continue. Please do document your story. Please look at the timeline when it's available and comment and add pictures. We really, really do need to capture these ideas. Maria and Javier, you all were absolutely wonderful as moderators and co-hosts. Juana and Asenet and Margaret, who were doing a lot of the technical backgrounds and prompting. And you all don't know, but our phone had like 200 chats going back and forth, making sure that we captured everything. And in the process, I got a glass of wine like Olga and Roberto did, and Juana. But we're going to do the 90s. I believe the 90s, it was in the chat, is in 2 weeks. And then we do the zeros, and then we do the 10s. Please look at the Alpha page or the Facebook page and LinkedIn to get the date. Yeah, Margaret just posted, this is the Great Gatsby. I'm doing the Great Gatsby 40 years later. And doing it in the LA skyline with good friends like Martin that I had dinner with his family not too long ago. But thank you. And I know it went over. Truly appreciate everyone's effort. Maria and Javier as co-hosts, anything you would say before we end? And but one last thing, actually, we will do this again, even for the 80s, because we didn't get to share stories about the Pachanga. And we didn't get to share stories about our Chicano caucus meetings in general or the Acción meetings. Or any of the efforts that happened in the 80s. We didn't get to share those stories because we were introducing ourselves. So we will do this again. I'm going to turn it back over to Maria and Javier for any last words, and then we'll be done, albeit an hour later, but truly appreciate the effort.
Thanks, Ricardo. We want to request. We have a request for a screenshot. So I don't remember who's our screenshot technician, but I'm happy to take it. And all I have to say is cheers. I'm drinking a Golden Cypress beer from New Orleans. And cheers.
I can